Welcome, everyone. I'm watching you all on the Restream and, of course, over in the Rumble Rants. Appreciate you guys being here, as always. Today, we've got a very interesting combo of guests. Breanna Morello, Breanna Morello Show on Rumble. You want to check that out. Also, her Substack, Breanna Morello, Morello Substack, and also on X. Breanna Morello, she, of course, is an investigative journalist, a media producer, decade plus of experience at major networks. And she's got some interesting stories that pertains to Fox and the TSA, and I want to hear some of that. And she is a very accomplished independent journalist presently. After she and I speak for a while, we're going to speak with Dr. AWR Hawkins. He's a Second Amendment correspondent, military historian. We're going to talk a little about gun safety and who needs guns and how the Second Amendment is designed to be used. His weekly newsletter is Downrange with AWR Hawkins, Hawkins. AWR Hawkins on X, and we'll see you right after this.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins, and a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue. And we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15. As I had said, we'll have AWR Hawkins in here after the bottom of the hour. But right now, let's get to Breanna Morello. Breanna, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Drew. I appreciate it.
You betcha. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, your name can be pronounced a number of different ways, and I've been schooled several times. And somebody go, it's Breanna, it's Breanna, it's Breanne. Help me.
Any of those work for me. I'm not particular, but Breanna is normally how I do say it myself.
Right. I love it. It's a sign of great mental health when somebody just goes, however you want to pronounce my name, that's fine. So thank you for that. Be sure to follow Breanna on X. Get on there right now, and don't forget her Rumble show. So I want to talk about you for a couple minutes before we get into guns and Second Amendment and all that. So TSA, what's going on with that? Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I broke a story. This has been in the works for like 2 years now. TSA has a terror watch list known as the Quiet Skies list. And so many Americans were added to this terror list. Now, it's heartbreaking because the only reason why they were put on this list is based on their political views. They're conservatives, and a lot of them did show up to the rally, which was a legal protest on January 6th. Now, they didn't have to be violent. They just literally had to be in the area at the time, and they were automatically added to the list. So it was heartbreaking to see that our federal government did just that, but they did. I also broke another story, too, about Tulsi Gabbard. As many of you guys know, she's a nominee to run DNI. She, too, was added to the terror watch list after she criticized Kamala Harris. Literally the very next day, she was added to the list. And, you know, we had individuals who were put on her detail to follow her on flights who reached out, and they were so enraged the fact that a former congresswoman, a service member, was being labeled a terrorist. And at first it was hard to believe,
Yeah,
but they said,
she brought it up during her testimony in front of the Senate committee, which that was, I didn't realize that was your story. Congratulations. That was that was so important for people to understand. To me, there are several moments of the last 4 years that are sort of emblematic, or what I call poster children for the excesses of the government. Jay Bhattacharya and the so-called devastating takedown that Francis Collins' email suggested, but Tulsi's the other one, that she's put on a terror watch list for daring to speak her mind at all, which sort of folds us into this conversation about the First Amendment, which is what, I mean, I have found myself as a result of really of this COVID, I've become a free speech absolutist and a champion. But I'm new to the game. I didn't know I was going to, at this stage of my life, going to have to be defending the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. But here we are. Have you been doing this for a while?
no, I haven't. So I was a registered Democrat, and I was someone who wasn't an absolutist at first and did think that we probably should restrict some speech. And then, like you said, COVID happened, and that was my tipping point in a lot of this. So I found myself on the interesting end of all of it, because I would say, oh, well, maybe we should, flag things for hate speech. But then the term hate speech became so vague, and they started putting things in this definition that wasn't really hate speech. It was just a difference in opinions.
Right. Is there a way to, as you think about free speech, I've decided there's no way to do this, but I'm going to ask you if you have a different idea, to contain free speech in some way. What are the barriers we should be putting on it, or is it just we want to hear it all?
I want to hear it all, because whenever we create barriers, I think, or restrictions, we kind of allow those who want to over restrict and kind of want to penalize those who have a difference in opinion, just kind of run rogue. And so I think we've learned that through the pandemic, is that we can't allow people to restrict any speech at this point. Now, the beautiful part about living in this great country is that you have the power to just not follow certain people, not watch certain shows. And because you make that decision, that individual, let's say it's a person that you disagree with who has a show, and they're spewing hate speech, that individual is not going to get advertisers, not going to be able to carry their own show. They're not going to be able to hire people to help them. So eventually, if they are as hateful as the rest of us think they are, they just won't have a show. And so that's just kind of the natural way for it to take place. And I think that's the way I support it. I don't support the intervention that we've seen over the last few years, because our own government has been stepping in and controlling speech. And it's heartbreaking to see, because that's what makes the American people, like the country as a whole, an incredible place to live. And we're kind of watching as like Doge and all the other groups are going after all of these government entities that have been going after the American people for talking about things that we're not supposed to talk about, according to them.
Yeah, it's sort of mind-boggling, the misappropriation of our tax dollars without seemingly anybody showing any concern for our money, the people who run the government, supposedly, our tax dollars being misappropriated and shamefully distributed. And at the same time, the government feeling that it's in a position to tell us how to live our life. It's astonishing that we live in that time. Did you also see Musk just tweeted a few minutes ago that he has discovered that something like 55% or something of the entire FBI staff was working on January 6th for the last several years? That the FBI was, again, not doing the people's business. It was focused on this lawfare.
Yeah, well, and this is the interesting part in all of this. They were actually told by higher up to do so. We know this because we saw the email. There was an email that went out just days after January 6th that said all federal resources regarding the FBI are going to go towards J6 related investigations. And so they meant it. And, I spoke to a supervisor who was forced to retire from the Bureau after he simply responded to that email by asking, hey, we're getting a lot of 2020 election fraud tips in. My agents want to know if we're supposed to go out there and investigate that. And just for putting that in writing and sending that to his higher ups, he was told the very next day to pack up his stuff and leave, and was forced into early retirement. So there's been an effort to make sure that they focus on January 6th. And there's also a lot of questions whether there's been federal informants, whether our federal government orchestrated it and tried to get people to get involved in the J6 rally prior to all of this happening. I mean, we have people like Jeremy Brown, who recorded the FBI allegedly trying to recruit him as an informant just weeks before the J6 protests actually took place. And so he recorded, he released it, and he's still sitting in federal prison right now for just that. They raided his home for a misdemeanor offense. They said they found things in his home that they shouldn't have, and he's sitting right now in prison because of all of this. So it's such a deep story, and it's such a black eye on American history when it comes to January 6th.
And I'm guessing you're out there looking for whistleblowers and for these people that left their jobs or were fired from their jobs for daring to ask questions. Is there, I maybe I'm wrong, but my bet is you're deep in that. And is there a story emerging, or is it too soon for you to talk about?
Well, for that story, I'm trying to circle back because sadly, that supervisor that I was referring to saw the treatment of other FBI whistleblowers and didn't want to have his life destroyed. And so he didn't want to come forward and tell me his name or his information. I was actually, the interview took place because I spoke with his attorney, and his attorney wanted me to meet with him. So he never provided me with his name, but his attorney, who is a whistleblower attorney for the FBI agents, was the one who did organize that meeting. Now, there are so many whistleblowers who are still dealing with the retaliation from the FBI. Garrett O'Boyle, Steve Friend, Kyle Seraphin. They were all put on unpaid suspension. Garrett O'Boyle, I believe, is going on almost 2 years of this right now, and he's got a young family. And it's what they do to shake you down, to make you break. They want you just to resign and just to comply, and they're making an example out of you because they don't want other whistleblowers to come forward.
Hang on. According to the former FBI director, McCabe, now is when FBI agents are scared because of the axe coming down. Now is when they're worried about losing their job. I'm confused, Breanna.
Isn't that strange? All of a sudden now they're all worrisome. They probably should have been a little afraid when, people like Garrett O'Boyle were told to move across the country. And then once they got there, the FBI suspended them, revoked their security clearance just months later, and then had their families out starving. I mean, a lot of these men went homeless after all of this and had to move in with relatives, their young kids and with relatives, and nobody seemed to care besides those on the right, sadly. The corporate media, CNN, MSNBC, none of them covered their stories. And so now they're pretending like they're afraid for President Trump, who might actually get rid of those who did things like that to Garrett O'Boyle, Kyle Seraphin, and Steve Friend. But I say that we have to purge the individuals who weaponize these agencies because the FBI doesn't have any credibility.
Do you think we'll find our way out of this?
I'm hopeful. Kash Patel sounds like he's going to do an incredible job. He's been calling this out for years now. He's written plenty of books on this. He's done plenty of interviews on this. This is something he's extremely passionate about, is bringing credibility back to the agency. It's going to take a lot of firings. When we were doing all the reporting and covering everything, a lot of the FBI directors who were put at the top of the organization were only installed there because they had anti-Trump posts on social media. And it was very easy to find. I found several of them here in Florida who were just bashing Trump on the regular on social media, and then they were promoted within the own agency. So these people need to be tossed out because there's no actual legitimacy behind any of them.
Back to the First Amendment. The modern interpretation of the First Amendment really came around, my understanding is after the First World War. It was sort of considered seditious before that a little bit, and there's some embarrassing moments early in the nation's history around sedition. And it hasn't always been an absolute right. It sort of evolved. Do you think it's going to stay in this zone, or is there going to be difficulty defending it going forward? Do you see landmines ahead?
Well, defending it is critical because we saw what they were trying to do over the last 8 years. They were trying to pick away at it. And, having a pandemic is a great way to make Americans or make anyone feel comfortable losing their rights. And, they say, well, this is for public safety concerns, and this is why we're going to censor these things. And I'm also really worried, Dr. Drew, and you'd be more of an expert on this subject, about the long-term effects of the young people who were told whatever the government tells you, you must comply with. If the government tells you to wear a mask, you have to wear a mask. I mean, those long-term effects condition their mind to think that this is normal and moving forward, that this is going to be acceptable. And we don't know what's going to happen.
Not only that, telling the flip side of that is telling them if they don't shelter in place and hide, according to our mayor, shelter in place here in Los Angeles, hide under their bed. If they dare to come out, they're going to kill their parents and their grandparents. So, God knows what kind of trauma those kids are going to carry through. And I want them to be pissed. I keep saying it. They need to be furious at what was done to them. Their adolescence was absconded with, and then they were mistreated. They were traumatized. They were abused. That's abuse. Call it what it is, abuse. And they need to grow up to be furious about it and to take action to make sure it never happens again. That is my hope, certainly. But what is the relationship? You mentioned the pandemic. I don't know if this is kind of a difficult and theoretical question. It seems like whenever tyranny raises its head, the issue of safety comes dancing around. It started with Robespierre and the Committee for Public Safety. I believe Stalin had a safety something that he was into. Certainly the Nazis had safety. Safety, whenever there's totalitarianism, look, here in Los Angeles, we can't rebuild our homes because it's not safe. When Trump came in here and said, let him in, she goes, yeah, okay, as long as it's safe, as long as it's safe. We'll decide what's safe for ourselves. Isn't that part of our First Amendment privilege?
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's the fear mongering campaigns that they all put on. And sadly, so many Americans fall for it. You shouldn't be afraid of these things. Use logic. I was so surprised. Remember when Joe Biden went on air and said it was going to be a winter of death or a season of death if those who didn't get the vaccine were just running around this country unvaccinated? So many people thought, oh my gosh, yes, it's in. And then they rolled up their sleeve and they got it without asking any questions. Well, how does your vaccine not work if I don't take it? That's simple. That's like middle school science. I was so surprised.
Yes.
The people who didn't ask simple questions. I'm not an expert. I just sit here and install logic into a lot of my theories here. And it was so disappointing to see so many people. It's a rarity these days, apparently.
Well, the problem is people have been delusional. I'm just calling it what it is. There's really been a delusional trend, and I've been reading and trying to figure it out, and reading all these books about these mass formations that develop. But delusionality seems to be a part of it, and hysteria. It's truly a hysteria. And in hysteria, your brain doesn't work, your judgment doesn't work, your reason doesn't work, and the fact that and panic and hysteria never makes things better. And I don't want to drift into the public health part of this because I've done that plenty of times with my medical colleagues here on the show, but that's the opposite of the public health job. To use fear, to have people like Fauci saying we're not scared enough, this is astonishing and again, abusive. But it is something that I guess happens every so often, is that hysterias develop, panics develop, delusional thinking develops. The problem now is, because, at the core of it, there is kind of a narcissism. And now we have people that still have that kind of delusional thought process who are saying to themselves and their friends that anyone who is supportive of what's going on in the government presently is interested in hate. They elected hate. They want hate. They are hateful. They're only interested in hate. That's delusional. That is turning other people into a cartoon character. That is an expression of your narcissism. That is when you turn other people into a cartoon, that's a narcissistic thing. But there's a hysteria embedded in it. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are and what we do to fight it other than protect our First Amendment rights.
Yeah, well, so I do have a lot of liberal friends, and one of them told me the same thing, that Trump supporters are hateful, that they're nasty people, that they're white supremacists. And so my project for him was to go to a Trump rally. And he told me he did go to a Trump rally, and he was actually surprised at the people and how welcoming they were of him, because he is a Black American, and he thought that it was actually kind of shocking. And I said, you probably got a better reception than you would have went if you would have went to like Kamala Harris rally, honestly, because most Trump supporters love the fact that we don't all look the same, that there is a difference in all of us, and they're very welcoming of that. Once you come up to them, you start talking to them and having these simple discussions. So I think, how do we break through it? Just talking to people that you normally wouldn't speak to. I mean, once you start doing that, you start peeling back the layers of the onion, you realize we all have common beliefs.
Yeah, you're right. There's a famous book called Contact, that was looking at all the data to overcome racism and bigotry and whatnot. And they finally determined that the number one remedy was contact, which is what you're advocating for. Also, my friend Ami Horowitz, who does these provocative videos, did a video back in 2016, I think it was. Might have been 2020. Hillary, yeah, it was a Hillary thing, where he went to the the Democratic National Convention and set up a booth out front saying with Trump flags and whatnot. And he was surrounded and threatened with his life. They were going to kill him. They were screaming at him. They were just going at him. Then he did the same thing at the Republican National Convention with Hillary materials. And everybody came up to him, patted him on the back and joked with him, said, dude, you're in the wrong place. Good luck with that. And went on about their business. That to me, so hateful, if that's in fact how you feel, you need to be careful that that's not a projection. Because oftentimes people are talking about this hateful group that they have no contact with through clenched teeth and seething anger. That's the other thing I hear. Narcissistic rage.
Yeah, there's a lot of that these days. And it's sad because, we have so much in common. And yes, our political views might not be identical, but most of us have the same goals we're looking to achieve. And so when you have these discussions with people, you start to realize that. So I think the reason why they do what they do, especially on the left, especially in the corporate media, is they don't want you having these simple discussions. We sat here and saw what they did when they watched President Trump get reelected. Those in the media, MSNBC, CNN, the typical talking heads, loved to go out there and say that he was Hitler, that he was all these nasty terms. And what happened? Well, there you have Barack Obama, who's hanging out with President Trump, laughing it up at Jimmy Carter's funeral. You see Joe Biden, so welcoming when President Trump arrives at the White House, giving him a hug, talking to him, laughing with him, walking around with him. If he was Hitler, you wouldn't be doing that. But they are very welcoming to Hitler, it looks like these days. So the point as a whole is we've got to stop with this. We've got to stop allowing these individuals to get in our ear and say these things because it's not true.
Yes. No, that's right. And so the corporate media, the mainstream media, so-called, has sort of been the major source of so much of this destructive materials. You had to leave Fox Corporation because of, was it the New York City mandate?
Yeah, it was the New York City vaccine mandate. And what's really interesting, too, to kind of put it all together, we talked about it before, too, in regards to just kind of like putting out propaganda and issuing propaganda. The Biden regime actually paid through HHS all of the major media outlets a lump sum of money. We don't know the exact dollar amount that they were paid, but I believe the figures are, as a whole, was $100 million to promote the COVID vaccines. But here's the thing, right? When I was working at Fox, we weren't allowed to criticize the COVID jabs. We also weren't allowed to have guests on who were critical of the jabs. I sat there and was a producer for one of their shows, and we pre-taped a segment, and it was Peter Navarro who was just simply saying, hey, listen, young people, if you're healthy and you really don't have much in the way of a risk if you get COVID, don't take the vaccines because you don't know long-term effects. Well, that portion got cut out and tossed out of the interview, and it didn't make it to air. So it just goes to show the propaganda is real, and they really were trying to brainwash Americans.
Yeah, well, propaganda, people don't understand. Propaganda, brainwashing, same phenomenon, same thing. That's what we're talking about. And so much of what's in the news as news is not news. It's propaganda. And it's funny, I'm going to interview a French-American actress, Beatrice Rosen, on Thursday. And I heard her on French radio talking about stuff, and it was the same thing. When the radio interviewers goes, well, what about this on the news? What about this? She goes, it's propaganda. It's not news. That didn't happen. It's just propaganda. And that's unfortunately a lot of what's on mainstream media. And then the alternative is sort of like Fox, where they're doing editorial commentary. At least they're not pretending differently. I don't think. I hope they're not. And on CNN too, I guess there are shows where they're just doing editorial stuff. But they need to be super clear. Do we call those journalists? What are they? They're doing talk shows.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them journalists, because if you're doing a segment like I just kind of described, like we have to promote the vaccines, there should be a disclaimer issued so Americans can assess for themselves and understand what's actually going on. Because, so many people were like, oh, well, there's good data out there. And everyone, there wasn't any data out there to tell you or tell pregnant women, for an example, that the vaccines are safe and effective on pregnant women. They pushed that out there, and we now know that there wasn't any data to justify that. And so when they promoted it, they failed to disclose the fact that they all took money, and that's why they weren't critical of the vaccine. So Americans just need to understand, when they're watching stuff unravel in front of their eyes, they have to kind of just go, well, is this true or is this false? Because they might be paid off to give me this type of an angle. And, I went and I clashed with human resources over at Fox. They had me relocate to New York City, and they waited to the day that I was unpacking with my movers to tell me that I had to be vaccinated or else I was being put on unpaid leave. That I truly believe was intentional. They've never debunked this story. I've told it for 2 years now. They never had anything to say against it. But they intentionally withheld it from me. And they wanted to, put me on unpaid leave. When I refused, fought back. They wanted to add more shows to my workload so that I would resign and quit. And it wasn't just me who was dealing with this. There were other producers also behind the scenes who were, but they just don't want to speak out because they still work for other corporations. But the reality of it is we have to be bold. We have to speak out about this. We have to tell people, hey, listen, don't trust the media. It's not always what it seems to be. There are people who are taking money behind the scenes. And we now know through the FOIA request that was done that all of these media outlets were paid. This isn't disputable anymore. We have the documents to back it up.
What's in your cross? I'm guessing you're happier doing this than being in a corporate situation. You're part of the liberation front, so to speak. And what's in your crosshairs now?
Yeah, well, I love this because I'm able to cover stories that normally would never make it to past the editorial meetings. They'd always get shut down. I'm going to keep following the lawfare. We have people who are still in prison who shouldn't be in prison. I know the Trump administration is working on freeing them, but there were so many hundreds of political prisoners that were taken in by Joe Biden and the DOJ. And it's heartbreaking when you talk to them and you tell them their stories. I did a sit-down interview on Steven Crowder's show with Enrique Tarrio. It was his first exclusive interview, and he was abused. And we're going to hold these people accountable. He was shifted to 40 different federal prisons. He was put in solitary confinement, which is a lockdown for 24 hours. For 15 minutes, 3 times a week, he was allowed out of his cell. But that's it. The long-term effects of all of these J6ers, all of these political prisoners, is long-term. And our federal government is going to have to pay up massively because they all are going to need therapy. There's no way that things go on as normal, and we just can't allow it. So I'm going to work on calling for investigations into these people.
There are a couple of really good attorneys under Pam Bondi, Mike Gates and Harmeet Dillon, and Leo Terrell is there. They will be very interested in these stories, I would think, because they are interested in justice. They're interested in restraining government, which is what I thought the country I lived in, which was less government, restrained government of the people, but we lost track of it. The managerial class I tweeted yesterday a book by James Burnham called The Managerial Class, and because Mark Andreessen mentioned a book called The Machiavellians, which I was reading. I got interested in his other stuff, and he was saying that no, Marxism is not the march of history. It's in fact this ascension of a managerial class, which is essentially bureaucracy. And that's exactly what has happened, and it's over. That has to stop. That's it. Maybe some countries can do that, but it's anathema to the American experiment.
Yeah, it is. And we lead the way here in the United States when we sit here and we say we're not allowing solitary confinement to be used as an abusive technique to break people. The rest of the world follows. I just want to highlight to your audience, too, that Tommy Robinson's sitting in a UK prison right now for speech. They didn't like what he said. They tried to silence him, and they said that he ignored the court's order, and he's been sentenced to 18 months in prison. But I've spoken with Tommy, and I continue to speak with him. He's sitting in solitary confinement as well. He's got nobody around him. He sits by himself for 24 hours a day in a hall, and the effects it has are long term. But thankfully, Elon Musk, I broke this story too exclusively, is helping Tommy. He's paying his legal fees to help him get a lawyer to appeal it, to fight his other upcoming case. And so that's how we fight back. We have to fight back on all fronts, even if it's not here in the United States.
Caleb, please look for Mark Andreessen's retweet in response to that tweet you put up there, that X post. And we have interviewed Tommy Robinson, I think, more than once here. And the British people seem to be coming out on his. There's Mark Andreessen responding to me. I was asking, is this going to go forward or backwards? And he says forward, essentially, from the managerial revolution to something else. And no one seems to be able to tell me what that something else is yet. I'm kind of hoping it's back to basics, really. But in any event, the British people are coming out in mass to support him. Did you see that demonstration last weekend?
Yeah. Thousands of people showing up to support him. They know it's exactly what they know. Their government's abusing him, and that he's not a terrorist. He loves his country, and he's speaking out for sexual assault survivors. His cousin is one of those sexual assault. That's why he got involved in all of this. She was sexually assaulted by a gang, and this is what happens, and they don't want to talk about it.
Common sense, balance. We need to get it all back into the radical middle here where I've been sitting this whole time. But I appreciate you being here. I have one sort of parting question about your last name. Any relationship to Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine?
Thankfully, no. He's gone far left these days, so he has no affiliation with my family.
He's not a bad guy, though. Are you like you said about getting together? You know what I mean? So he has those opinions. Excellent. I still like Tom. Let's all get together here. All right. Where would you like people to go to find you?
Available on Rumble. Just look the Breanna Morello Show, and we're on X as well. Just Breanna Morello.
All right, Breanna. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Dr. Drew.
You got it. And now coming up, it's AWR Hawkins, PhD, Second Amendment correspondent. We've had a little brief discourse about First Amendment. Now we're going to talk about how Second Amendment can protect the First Amendment. And really, I've got lots of questions about whether I should be a gun owner or not. I have not been, but Susan is beginning to move that direction quickly. So we'll talk more about that right after this. Well, you've heard me praise Paleo Valley's grass-fed finished beef bone broth and the delicious meat sticks. I now want to turn it over to Paleo Valley founder and CEO, Autumn Smith, to tell you about her company's food philosophy.
I'm here to help create the products that make healthy food convenient in our modern world. The diet and the food you're consuming is absolutely related to your digestive health, to your mental health, to every aspect of your health. The devil's in the details here. And not only do we have to attend to every single ingredient, we have to support a system with whole foods. And so when we source a product, it's going to be organic, it's going to be tested for pesticides, and then it's going to be grass-fed and finished or pasture-raised. It's going to be raised on regenerative American farms.
The protein sticks that come in 8 varieties are likewise impeccably sourced and prepared.
And the fermentation process came about because there was an ingredient that I didn't like in meat sticks that's pretty widespread. It's called encapsulated citric acid, and it's derived from GMOs and then hydrogenated oil, and it just melts into the beef stick. And you don't have to label it. That's the thing. You can label it citric acid.
Make 2025 a year to cut out the chemicals and feed yourself correctly. Go to drdrew.com/paleovalley for 15% off your first order, 20% off when you subscribe. That is drdrew.com/paleovalley. If there was ever a time to be rationally ready, it is now. I urge you to consider getting one of the emergency kits from the Wellness Company, because TWC has 7 different kits that are customized for a variety of situations. Wouldn't be a bad idea to take a look at each, considering, say, what we've just been through in California with the fires. I was happy to have the field kit on hand, and the Contagion kit in particular is suited for what is being predicted to be the next outbreak, or avian or bird flu. Of course, the same experts from the COVID era are freaking out about this potential pandemic, but don't panic. Just arm yourself with the meds you might need if this comes to pass. Contagion Emergency Kit contains ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, Tamiflu, and budesonide, an inhaler that is good for airway reactivity and tightness, as well as reducing viral replication in the airways. Go to drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off your purchase.
Dr. Drew said the best way to quit drinking is by going cold turkey, and he's a doctor, so why would you question doctors?
Dr. Drew called me unfixable.
And as I said, we've got AWR Hawkins coming in, Breitbart Second Amendment correspondent, military historian, a degree in military history from Texas Tech, Civil War and Vietnam War studies. He's a 5-time award recipient from the Second Amendment Foundation, Journalist of the Year, Gun Rights Defender of the Year, 2016-2020. His newsletter is Downrange with AWR Hawkins, and you can find him Breitbart.com/author/AWR-Hawkins. And you can follow him on X at AWR Hawkins. Welcome to the program.
Oh, great to be with you.
Appreciate it very much. So let's get into a little philosophy before we get into the hardware. How is it that the Second Amendment is designed to protect the First Amendment?
Well, I mean, if you don't have a Second Amendment, the federal government will run roughshod over you. State government will too, but the federal government is what the founders are worried about. If your listeners, your viewers want to understand that, I would encourage them to read Federalist 46, written by James Madison, and he was trying to encourage ratification of the Constitution And in Federalist 46, he explained that the people are armed so that they can band together in the event of government overreach, and that banding together would have teeth, it would have force, because the people would be armed. And without guns, the people can band together all they want. It'll look like a country in the Middle East that we've seen before, where they band together and they throw rocks and they swing rakes. And, they might hurt each other a little bit doing that, but they're not going to stop a government. And so that was James Madison's conviction, and that was his passion. You can read it, as I say, in Federalist 46, and that citizenry being armed puts a check on government overreach, and it makes sure they don't overrun the rights that are hedged in, that are protected from their interference.
And yet we were fully engaged with the Second Amendment, it seemed like, during the COVID pandemic, and we've had nothing but government overreach for the last 4 years. They've been able to do it in spite of the Second Amendment. Did we miss our opportunity? What happened?
I don't know. I mean, I think there is a trigger point. I don't even use that as a play on words. I just think there is a point. I spoke at the Reagan Ranch a couple of months ago, and during question and answer, that came up. They're like, how far can it go before the people react? I don't know where that point is, but I know that our founders believe there is such a point. I hope it never gets there. And I believe with Trump in, we're going in the opposite direction now. So we're getting a little reprieve. But I believe there is a point. I just don't know where that is.
There's a very interesting thing happening in Europe right now around knives. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they've been almost a, I don't want to use a word like pandemic, but a lot of knife attacks. And their response is so odd. The British are contemplating outlawing knives. That's their response. We have to get rid of knives now, as though that would do anything, number one. And then number two, the French are saying, they're going, oh, just don't leave home with a knife. Leave it in the kitchen, as though, what is wrong with people? It's like they don't understand human beings. Have we lost track of how humans actually work?
Right. No, you're exactly right. Now, their thought pattern, I would argue, is not illogical when you understand how their mind works. The leftist minded, the logical next step is to ban the next weapon. That's the logical step. That doesn't mean it's right. It just means it's logical in their framework. And, you look at Chicago. Chicago in 1982 banned all handguns. And as bad as homicide is right now in Chicago, it's not anywhere close to where it was from 1982 to 2010. That's how long that handgun ban lasted. During that ban, where people were not allowed to carry guns or own handguns, criminals still had the gun, and criminals just put it on them.
Right. Of course. I mean, criminals leave with knives and with guns and pipes and whatever else they need to arm themselves with. And it's almost, I don't know, common sense seems to be back. I mean, people are like, they're waking up from some sort of stupor they were in. What is that, Caleb, you're putting up? I can't quite read that. Is that something is AWR put up there?
Yeah, it's a post that he made. It was about an intruder that broke into a North Carolina home. But the alleged intruder is now in critical condition because the homeowner had a gun and stopped him.
Right.
Well, let's talk about the gun. So I don't like that I live in a world where I have to think about getting a gun, but I think I live in that world. Who should get it? What kind? How do you decide? How do you keep it safe? Those sorts of issues.
Well, I believe every law-abiding citizen should own a gun. And I just believe that because even when at our founding, I hear you say we don't like to live at a time where we need a gun, but in our founders' minds, we needed a gun then. And I believe it's part of being responsible that we are able to protect our families and ourselves. That being said, you ask yourself, why do you want a gun? Are you going to carry it every day? Are you going to keep it at home and use it for home defense and self-defense in the home? Are you going to use it for home defense and target shooting? So those are things you have to ask yourself. If I were just buying a gun, let's say for home defense, and that's all I was going to do, I would start with a shotgun. If I was going to start with any shotgun, it'd be a Mossberg 590S. That's a pump shotgun. You're not going to ever have a failure with that shotgun. And you have a pattern of shot coming out of a shotgun rather than a single projectile. So if someone is running at you, and no one wants to think about this, but this is reality. I write on it every day. If someone is running at you down a hallway and your wife and kids are crouched behind you in a closet and only you and that shotgun stand between them and this attacker, that shotgun gives you the benefit of a wide shot pattern so that you, odds are, you're not going to miss that person. And hitting them with a 12 gauge shell, you're going to stop that attack quick. The stopping power is unbelievable. So a shotgun to me for home defense, if that's all you're interested in, as I say, the Mossberg 590S would be my go-to, hands down. If you're thinking about carrying a gun, I would look at a SIG, P365, any variant. I love a P365 macro. This is what I carry, so I happen to have it with me. That's a P365 macro, and I have a flashlight on it, as you can see. And that's because at night, when I take that out of my holster, I lay it on my bedstand. And if something were to happen, I have the benefit of when I draw that firearm, I have a flashlight on the end of it. So wherever I point, I see everything. Flashlight's extremely bright. And because it's a SIG, it'll never fail. And it's compact. That was a very small gun, you probably noticed, but it still holds 18 rounds of 9mm ammo, which is a great round for man or woman. It doesn't, even for petite women, a 9mm doesn't have the extreme kick you see represented in TV or on the movies. So it's a great choice. And if a female thinks even a 9's too much, you can slip down to a 380. And a 380 is just a shorter 9. And one of the SIG models, the 365, their most popular model, it is also available in 380. So that's an option. That's what I would do. I would go straight shotgun, or I would step to that 9mm pistol. And if someone just wants something they're going to keep on their nightstand, and you still have some people who think like our grandpas thought, and they only trust revolvers. And if that's how you think, I would think about the Colt King Cobra. I'm just showing you so you can see the size of this. This is a Colt King Cobra. This holds 6 rounds of 357 ammo. And no matter how advanced ammunition gets, no matter how advanced gun technology gets, the 357 Magnum will always be one of the greatest man stoppers of all time. All right. So that round is a round that you can literally trust your life to. And if that's your bedside gun and the husband's out of town, but the wife wants to keep that gun on the nightstand, that gun being chambered in 357 Magnum will also shoot 38 Special, which is a much lighter load, much reduced recoil, but it will still get the job done. So that's a good gun if a husband and wife are going to share, and she might be using it some when he's out of town and vice versa.
Susan, do you have any questions about guns? You hear what AWR is talking about here. He's saying that we should have a shotgun and a pistol if you're interested in carrying something. You know, go ahead, Susan. I'll let you ask.
If you're not a good shot, have a shotgun.
Well, that's for
I
sure.
like the AKR.
The AKR, is that something you shot with Emily?
I'm a good aim with that. But
I'm gonna tell you,
the only
I
time
like-
I've ever really Okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I apologize.
The only time I've really thought about having a gun was to protect my house from arson.
Right.
I saw the terrorists running around with their blowtorches and setting people's houses on fire. It would be the only time I would actually want a gun.
But we're in California. Why not have then a high-powered pellet gun or something? Because if you shoot somebody who's lighting a fire, you will go to jail.
I know. That's the only time I would have the instinct to shoot somebody.
But you have to remember, you're in You're in California. California led the nation in active shooter incidents in 2020. 2021 and 2023. So the gun control out there, don't worry. I write many times someone pulls a fake gun and I include a pellet gun as a fake gun. Someone will pull a fake gun, they get shot with a real gun. So I would encourage people to have a real gun, but that's just me.
But I also heard if you shoot somebody outside of your house, you have to drag them inside.
I can't believe we're having this conversation.
Because you're not allowed to shoot them outside the house. But if they come in the house.
Emily, I blame you. I blame Emily Barsh.
Well, those statements, though, would have been accurate in the 70s. But beginning in the mid 80s, you saw a change in Florida. Florida went from a may issue state for concealed carry to a shall issue state. That swept across the country. And following that was stand your ground and castle doctrine. And what these laws do, if you live in a state that has castle doctrine, if you shoot someone in your home and it's justifiable, it was self-defense, you cannot be sued. If they have a stand your ground law, the same thing. You cannot be held liable. And so that old scenario in those states is gone because they've shifted the law so that the law protects the victim instead of the criminal, which I believe is how it should have been all along. In some states, and probably California is one of them, you'll really need to study up on what has to happen in order to use a gun for self-defense. I encourage everybody, no matter what state you're in, study the law because you want to carry within the framework of the law. And if you have to use that gun, you always want to know I'm using it within the framework of the law. That's super important.
Doesn't having you mentioned carry a weapon with you at all times, doesn't that require a lot of training to really live up to that responsibility?
Well, I think that's number one. That's a phenomenal question, and it does. I do run into people, but very few, who will buy a gun and then they literally put it on a shelf in their room or do whatever, and they're going to keep it for that day. But that's not how you do it. You need to regularly go to the range so that you know where that bullet is going to go when you pull a trigger. And for a lot of people, what I've learned, because I teach a lot of people how to shoot, and what I learned when I get with somebody who looks at guns as if there's something mystical about them or something spooky about them, just learning where that bullet's going to go when they pull the trigger. We're hitting that target. They're hearing the steel ping, ping, ping. It not only gives them a degree of confidence at the range, but if someone were to break in their home, it helps their confidence in that moment too. Because we all wonder, how will we react in that moment? And if you're someone who has trained, you will react better. You just will, because you have the confidence. I know how to use this firearm. I know how to manipulate its controls. I know where the bullet's going to go. I'm not just lost. I'm not just grabbing something I'm not familiar with. And so for all of those reasons and more, if you get a firearm, you have to shoot it. You have to become familiar with it. And if you guys get a couple of guns, I would love to travel to you, bring some steel targets, and we will shoot and we will become proficient and we'll enjoy ourselves.
Susan, that's a pretty compelling offer.
You look so serious. He's like,
well, this is a serious business. I can't believe we're having these conversations. But a friend of ours, a comedian that went viral for making fun of Americans with all of our gun ownership, particularly around the issue of our gun safes. That the fact that if we're in a crisis situation, we still have to go in, open a safe, and bring it back. Address that issue.
Well, now I wouldn't, because I always keep one. As I have pulled up that pistol, I always keep a gun with me, but I do lock up everything else. But I don't do that because the government told me to. I don't live in a state where the government mandates how I keep my guns. It's none of their business. The Fourth Amendment tells them that. I believe if we get the right court challenge, we'll destroy all of the storage laws. But I agree, and the comedian may be making a point he didn't intend to make, but I make that argument every time someone passes a gun storage law. What they've done is they've put another step between myself and my tool of self-defense. And I cover, I don't know how many stories each year where you're watching TV and someone splinters your front door, boom, they're on you. They're on you. Now, you might have a gun in a safe three rooms over, down the hall and up the steps, but guess what? You'll never get your hands on it. So those laws are detrimental to self-defense. Now, I believe as a responsible gun owner, and I hate that phrase because it's been so misused by the left, but without anybody telling me what I need to do as far as government goes, I know I keep my guns locked up in case some of my friends come over who have young kids, in case anything like that happens. No one will ever find a gun in my house. They just won't. The only loose gun is either on my hip or on my nightstand when I go to bed. And that's just how I am. But that gun is always close, because if my front door splinters, I do not want to turn out to be one of the people I've written about so many times who either planned to get a gun and didn't, or did get a gun, but they had it locked away 100 foot from where they were sitting. That's not going to do you any good.
I want to have a couple of minutes of military history from you, may I?
Oh, sure.
That's your doctorate, right? Am I getting that right?
Yes, sir. Civil War, Vietnam War, U.S. Navy, and War of 1812. Well, early modern Europe, I should focus on.
I'm fascinated. We've forgotten the 1812 war is the forgotten war. I've always said that if you want to learn what happens when you don't finish a war, it's 1812.
Yeah.
If you get Cuba, you get mess in the Philippines. Right? Am I wrong about that?
No, 1812, it is funny. It is somewhat of a forgotten war. 1812.
Well, I'm sorry. I was thinking of Spanish. I was thinking of the Spanish-American War. I beg your pardon. 1812 is the only incursion we've ever had on U.S. soil, right? On the mainland.
Right. But the Spanish-American War, I give you that. Definitely. That's a war that wasn't finished. It wasn't seriously fought, in my opinion. And the same thing can be said about the Korean War. You look at that. It's just been ongoing, and also known as the Forgotten War. So, yeah, we have to get back to fighting total war. And that is another thing I look forward to under Trump. Not that we're going to get into a total war, but that people know we will get into one, and that will keep them from doing it. Just the thought of total war with the U.S. is more than most people can imagine.
Well, I don't know if you saw, he just released a statement where he was going at the Iranian oil. I don't know if he's going to embargo or tariff or whatever he's going to do. And somebody said, "What are you going to do if they try to assassinate you?" Which I thought was a very courageous question from a journalist. And he said, "I've left written instructions that they must follow, and they will be obliterated."
All right. See, that's how you do it. That's when I say total war, and I know you know, but for any of the viewers, total war is the war we fought in World War II, where we literally used every tool we had, every option we had, and we brought them to their knees. It wasn't enough to get surrender. The goal was victory. That's how Trump thinks. Yeah. And so it is a return to that kind of warfare that will keep our enemies in check, because nobody wants our military unleashed if they are truly unleashed. Not the way we kept them handcuffed during Vietnam. That was so unfair. But if we unleash them like we did in World War II, nobody wants any part of that.
Back to the Civil War, do you have any sense of how Lincoln was able to develop his military acumen? Here he has McClellan doing, essentially what he was trained to do in military school, to, preparing every molecule of his defense and his, I don't think he had any intents for an offensive sort of operation. But Lincoln knew even that early in the war that was a bad idea. Well, at first he went along with it. Then he thought it was a bad idea. How did you any sense of where was Grant in his ear? Was there something more going on there?
I do not know that. I don't want to venture a guess. My Civil War studies focused largely on the navies of the Civil War. And so that war is so gigantic, as you know. It gets so specialized that there are a million questions you could ask me outside of that I wouldn't venture a guess on, because I wouldn't want to mislead somebody.
Okay. I was down in Mobile Bay 3 months ago, and I became fascinated by the first of all, how huge Mobile Bay is and how they were able to fight. What they thought they were doing there confused me. What was the Battle of Mobile Bay all about?
Well, Mobile Bay in specific, I hate to tell you, I don't remember What I studied there, I studied battles that took places on rivers in between Texas and Louisiana and different places, and the acquisition of ships.
Isn't that Grant's first great victory, Donaldson on the river? Or Donaldson is what they called that?
I don't know his first great victory on that river. I really don't.
Yeah, I think it was on the Mississippi. But I think that was where he sort of cut his teeth and showed he could take over a fort. With back to this idea of bold action in war. That was his thing. That's for sure. Well, listen, I appreciate you letting me pick your brain a little bit, and I appreciate you giving me information about the Second Amendment and guns, things I know nothing about. And I hope. Let me get quickly on our chat room and see if anybody else has any questions for you. What's up? Oh no, I'm sorry. Let me look. I'm looking. Sorry, guys. I'm on the Rumble also. Last question before I let you go. People make a lot of gun safety and the risk of having a gun, a firearm around. What do you say people are worried that the risk of having the firearm and somebody using it in an impulse or inappropriately or hurting somebody is a higher risk than being able to protect yourself? What would you say to somebody who raises that issue?
I've never been able to see that demonstrated. I've seen that claimed, and I've seen it claimed by people who do what you would call gun control research, even if they don't admit that. But I have never seen proof that is true. They used to always say, oh, we can't do concealed carry because if a woman carries a gun, someone's liable to just take it away from her and use it on her. And to me, that's one of the greatest put downs of women ever. And women everywhere should be outraged that just because you're a woman, someone's going to be able to take your handgun away from you. That's ridiculous. And I've not seen that play out. Yeah, you can surely find an example of that happening. You can surely find an example of a man having a gun taken away. But at the end of the day, if you read Gary Kleck's work, he's a criminologist at Florida State University. Guns are used in the United States for defensive purposes, are used at least 760,000 times a year. That's the lowest figure you're going to see. It only goes up from there. Now, if you think that we have roughly 13,000 firearm homicides a year, 13,000. Compare that, 13,000 versus 760,000 uses justifiable to save life and property. The justifiable uses eclipse the criminal uses. Those are the facts they don't want out there. And that's why they do those little bumper sticker mantras that tell everybody, be scared if you get a gun, you're in danger. I would argue you're probably in greater danger if you don't have one, because if someone comes in your home, what are you going to do? You're going to throw a shoe? You're going to throw a book? I mean, I'm not even trying to be funny. I'm just saying, I don't understand a world where everyone is not prepared to defend themselves.
Follow AWR on Breitbart, also on X at AWR Hawkins, HAWKINX, and the Breitbart's /author /AWR Hawkins. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thank you for that kind offer to travel to go to help us learn how to do this. Caleb, that was pretty interesting, right?
Oh, yeah. I had to show you. This is me with my grandfather whenever I was a child. I was started on guns even sooner than this, learning how to hunt out on the fields. I've never had a fear of guns. My guns are always safe and locked away. And this is the first time I've actually ever said anywhere that I own guns, because I was always taught that one of the safe ways of being, like one of the responsible ways of being a gun owner is to not let people know that you actually own them, because then they might want to come and steal it.
Right.
But then also at the same time, not let them know that you don't have it. Like, let them constantly question it. So no one can come through that door and they don't know what to expect. And so I'm going to do the same thing with my kids. They're going to learn gun safety when they're older, not now, but they're going to learn gun safety because it's the only way to defend yourself. I don't want to be a person. I didn't want to own a gun. I got it around some election probably like 8 years ago, even after, living in Texas and growing up there, and never had to use it. And I hope I never do.
And Caleb lives off Mobile Bay. That's one of the things we were doing down there.
Yeah.
And maybe we should come down there and then meet AWR there. And with the four of us can go do that. Susan,
Absolutely.
did you learn anything? Were you listening?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Well, I do.
what are
I
you
also
thinking,
want to
shotgun?
say.
Yes, please.
Also want to say that as someone, I grew up in Texas, and so we were always taught from birth that, commie California, you would be impossible to get a gun there, that everything's locked down, you have to go through all these hoops and everything. And so I thought that it was going to be a very long, drawn out process. Now, it is a much longer process than you might get in Texas or Alabama. But when I was in California, there's nothing on my record, nothing on my wife's record. We went and we got the training. And we were able to pick up the gun. I think it was 14 days later. Like from start to finish, it was basically just like a waiting time in case you were some crazy person that wanted to go out and hurt someone. That's considered very strict compared to Texas. But at the same time,
I, by the way, like the idea of at least some sort of limitation on people with certain mental health issues or substance use, things like that. At least to put some barriers in the way of that, because that's how you get into big trouble.
And I'm
Susan,
not even
anything
against,
else?
not even against the waiting period.
Yeah.
Like I think that's especially for places like Los Angeles with high populations. Now in Texas, I don't think you need a waiting period there. Texas, that's built into Texas. Everyone has guns from birth, but.
And I didn't wade into the whole thing about assault weapons and all that business. I didn't even get into that stuff. But Susan, anything else from your standpoint?
All very interesting.
Okay. Well, you have a show coming up. You want to talk about it?
I do. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock Pacific. 3 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah.
We are doing a special calling out with two psychics to talk about the Black Hawk incident recently that took the lives of an entire skating team in Virginia and the USFSA skaters.
And Zach Voorhees coming in?
Among others. And also we're going to have the Google whistleblower, Zach Voorhees, to give his interpretation or his conspiracy theory, which, who knows, may not be a conspiracy theory. We'll know eventually. I also am going to have a discussion with Green Girl about Kanye West.
Ooh, interesting. There's the whole team there, right? Is that everybody?
Yeah, it's going to be a big shoe.
Not having, is Emily coming in?
Emily, no, we swapped her out for Green Girl.
Okay, Jimmy Dore coming in again. We've got Patrick Soon Yishong. He is the owner of the LA Times, who's completely seemed to have changed his political orientation. I'm so curious what happened to him. He was a very decorated transplant surgeon, handed the LA Times over to his daughter after he bought it, and now seems unhappy with that. Some of the choices he has made or the Times has made. We'll talk about that. Beatrice Rosen is the French-American actress I was talking about. So keep an eye out for great guests coming up. We've got a lot heading your way. We will be here. I will be here. Let me get this correct. I'll be here tomorrow at 3. You're at noon, correct, Susan?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll be here at 3
Mike
with
Young and Curtis Hoke.
Yes, we'll be talking on freedom of the press and also his comedy, Mike Young. Let's see, he is about, it seems like he's sort of in the more free speech zone. So we'll talk to those guys. And then the Beatrice Rosen will be at noontime Pacific on Thursday. And then we're going back down to Babyville after that, right? You're going tomorrow. Or no, tomorrow. Yeah, okay.
Go see my granddaughter.
All right, everybody. We will see you tomorrow for Susan's show at noon Pacific, and I'll be back here again at 3 tomorrow. Do that. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.